There's something you do that almost no one has ever noticed. Not your friends, not your family, and maybe not even you. Not with full clarity, not with the kind of honest recognition that actually changes something, but it's there. Every time life gets heavy, every time things start quietly breaking apart beneath the surface, your first response is never to reach out. Your first response is to go inward, to tighten, to tell yourself you'll figure it out, that you've handled worse, that other people have real problems and yours don't quite measure up. You say, __, quote _0, __, before the question is even finished. You minimize what you're feeling, fold it smaller, tuck it somewhere out of sight, and wait. You wait for the pain to earn permission. And in the meantime, you carry everything, quietly. With a kind of competence that looks like strength from the outside, but that privately, tells a very different story. Why does asking for help sometimes feel harder than suffering alone? It's not laziness. It's not pride. It's something much older, something that formed in you long before you were old enough to name it. And today, we're going to look at it directly. The first trait is hyper-independence. And the word hyper matters, because we're not talking about healthy self-sufficiency. We're talking about something that has moved beyond choice into something closer to compulsion. An independence so automatic, so deeply built into how you function, that asking for help doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It barely registers as an option. This was built from something you lived through. At some point, you absorbed a lesson that was never spoken but communicated clearly. Your needs were inconvenient. When you reached out, things went unanswered. Or the response carried a cost. Frustration, withdrawal, a quiet shift that taught you making requests was dangerous territory. And so, you did the most intelligent thing available to you at the time. You stopped depending. You turned inward. You built an emotional self-sufficiency that let you survive in a place where relying on others felt unsafe. You learned, not with words but somewhere deeper, that needing less meant hurting less. That lesson stayed with you. It became the blueprint underneath everything. But what was once survival slowly became something else. Independence started wearing a disguise, and the disguise was so convincing that even you forgot it was one. Underneath it, quietly, was isolation. And from that isolation, a second pattern grew. Over time, you learned to become the easy person, the one who doesn't cause problems, who adapts without complaint, who makes themselves comfortable to be around by quietly removing any version of themselves that might be considered too much. Low maintenance, people call it. They mean it as a compliment, and you receive it as one, even though somewhere, in a place you don't always look, you understand it cost you something real to become this way. Because the belief driving all of it wasn't comfort, it was fear. Somewhere along the way, you arrived at a quiet and devastating conclusion, that your needs were too much. That wanting something made you a burden. That expressing a desire carried the risk of pushing people away, of giving them a reason to find you harder to love. And so you stopped asking. Not because the needs disappeared, they never disappeared, but because your needs began to feel expensive, like something you couldn't afford to place in front of the people you cared about, in case the price turned out to be their withdrawal. You became skilled at earning affection through usefulness, at giving in ways that were visible, while receiving in ways that were deflected or avoided altogether. You made love feel safer by making it cost the other person nothing, and in doing that, something quietly happened. You became invisible. Not to the people around you, They see you perfectly well as the reliable one, the strong one, but invisible in the way that matters most. Your real needs, your actual emotional weight, the things you carry without telling anyone, those stayed so hidden for so long that they became almost foreign, even to you. When your own emotions stay hidden long enough, a third pattern takes shape. People who struggle to ask for help are almost always extraordinarily attuned to the emotions of others. You read rooms. You catch the slight tension in someone's jaw, the half-second pause before they answer, the texture of a silence most people walk right past. But this sensitivity isn't a natural gift. It's a skill built out of necessity. At some point, reading the emotional temperature of your environment became essential to your safety. Knowing how someone felt before they showed it let you prepare, adapt, avoid. You learned to manage the atmosphere of every room you entered, not because anyone asked you to, but because it felt somewhere deep and unspoken, like yours to carry. You became an expert at holding emotional weather that was never yours to begin with. And the cost is immense. Because while you're perpetually occupied with monitoring and absorbing and quietly steadying the people around you, your own inner life sits in a permanent waiting room. Always postponed. Always secondary. And when the room finally empties, when there's no one left to support, you find something almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it from the inside. An exhaustion that goes beyond tired. A hollowness that comes not from doing too much, but from consistently pouring from a place that was never being refilled. And rather than hearing that as a signal, you feel guilty. Because somewhere in your internal logic, the exhaustion itself becomes proof that you should have given more. It's from this exhaustion that the fourth trait emerges. And this one lives very close to the center of everything. Vulnerability, for you, doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It registers as a threat. When you find yourself on the edge of saying something true, something unfiltered, something that would let another person actually see you, something contracts. An internal mechanism faster than thought closes the door before you've decided to open it. The reason, traced all the way down, is uncertainty. Opening up means stepping into territory where you have no control over what happens next. You don't know if what you share will be understood or misread. You don't know if your vulnerability will be held with care or met with a judgment so quiet you won't recognize it right away. You'll just feel it later, in the small shift that follows exposure. For someone who learned early that control was the only reliable form of safety, that uncertainty is genuinely intolerable. And so, armor was built, not deliberately, layer by layer, every time you chose to hold something inside rather than risk what showing it might cost. Every edited answer, every redirected conversation, every "I'm fine" that meant something else entirely. The armor protects you. That's real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. But armor doesn't only block what could harm you. It blocks everything. It keeps people from reaching you. It creates a distance you can feel and they can feel. A kind of glass between you and real closeness that gives every connection this faint, persistent ache. The ache of being almost known, of being cared for by people working with an incomplete picture who would want to see the rest, if only you believed it was safe to show them. Beneath all of these layers, there is something even deeper, something that sits at the very foundation of all of it. The fifth trait, and in many ways the most important one, is this. You secretly believe your pain needs to earn the right to exist. You measure what you feel against what others are going through and find yours insufficient. You compare your struggles to more visible, more serious suffering and conclude that yours don't qualify. That what you're carrying isn't heavy enough to warrant attention, isn't broken enough to justify support. You've become your own gatekeeper, sitting at the entrance to your own emotional life with a set of requirements your pain almost never meets, turning yourself away from the care you extend to everyone else without a second thought. You learned somewhere that your suffering was less legitimate, that others deserved care more, and so you learned to do preemptively to yourself what you feared others might do. You invalidated what you felt before anyone else had the chance to. You minimized. You waited. You told yourself that when things got truly bad, when the pain crossed some threshold you couldn't quite define, then you'd ask. Then it would be justified. But the threshold kept moving, because the belief underneath was never about the severity of the pain. It was about whether you deserved to have your pain matter at all. Think about how much you've carried because you decided it wasn't enough yet. How long you stayed in situations that were already hurting you, telling yourself to be stronger, to last a little longer. How much has passed through you without witness because you appointed yourself the judge of your own suffering and ruled over and over again against yourself. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because when you look at all 5 of these traits together, what do you actually see? You might be tempted to see flaws, patterns to fix, evidence of something broken, but that's not what these are. Every single one of these traits was a solution before it became a problem. Hyper-independence kept you functional when depending on others felt dangerous. Becoming easy kept relationships stable when your presence felt conditional. Monitoring others kept you safe when unpredictability was the norm. Armor protected something fragile when exposure carried real cost. And minimizing your pain kept you moving when stopping to feel it wasn't something your life could afford. You were not broken. You were surviving. The difficulty isn't that you developed these patterns. The difficulty is simply that you're still carrying them into rooms where they no longer serve you. Into relationships that are actually safe. Into moments that could hold you. If only you would let them try. Learning to let them try doesn't require dismantling everything at once. It starts smaller than that, almost uncomfortably small. It starts with asking for something minor, with letting someone see a fragment of what you're carrying before the whole thing becomes too heavy to hide. With choosing, just once, not to say quote to when you aren't, and staying with whatever happens when you make that choice. It starts with learning to receive. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It builds in small, repeated moments, through experiences of being seen and not abandoned, of being imperfect and still accepted, of having needs and finding that the relationship didn't collapse because of them. You don't have to offer your whole heart at once. You can offer it slowly, in amounts that feel survivable, and find over time that survivable becomes something more than that. Maybe you've spent so many years being the person who holds everything together that you've forgotten there was ever a version of you who didn't have to carry quite this much. Maybe "I'm fine" has been said so many times, in so many moments when it wasn't true, that it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like just the way things are. But strength was never supposed to mean needing nobody. It was never supposed to mean disappearing so completely behind your own reliability that there's nothing left of you that anyone is actually allowed to reach. The most honest form of courage available to someone who moves through the world the way you do isn't enduring more. It's allowing yourself to be seen. Before you've sorted through everything, before you've found the right words, while it still feels uncertain and unfinished and uncomfortably real. Because maybe you were never meant to carry all of this alone. Maybe the people who see you as unshakable have no idea what you're actually holding. And maybe, if they knew, they would want to help. Maybe strength, the real kind, the lasting kind, looks less like never needing anything, and more like trusting just enough that someone else might be able to hold something with you for a while. Which of these 5 traits felt the most familiar to you?